prospects. Took a week off and we are back. I'm Logan Bourandas, showing alongside, as always, Chris Lemmo. And we had a special guest last week, and it's not a trend unless you do it twice. So we brought in Carlos Garcia, one of the top prospects in Penn State Sports Night right now. So going with the theme. But Carlos, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
I must say it's not fun having another person wearing a Phillies jersey. We had that with Matt last week, but
I know it's kind of like I'm just following in the theme. Definitely gotta represent Bryce Harper, one of the top guys in the league right now, and a personal favorite of mine. So that's definitely why.
yeah,
Love to see it. Love to see it.
But we have a lot to talk about today, actually. We had spring training start up a couple weeks ago, and there were some signings that took place both today and yesterday that weren't on the rundown. I want to hit on just a little bit here. But the Jackie Bradley Jr. signing was something that we've been talking about on the show here for the past couple of weeks, but it finally happened. And of all the teams, he decided to go to the Milwaukee Brewers on a contract there. But Chris, we're talking about this real quick. Just quick impact of the signing.
Yeah, I mean, JBJ actually ended up getting the money that I kind of thought he would. It took a lot longer, though. I thought he would sign before spring training started. That being said, I didn't really see the fit in Milwaukee. I didn't really think that they needed. I don't know. I didn't see them getting him. Milwaukee, they already have, of course, Yelich in the outfield. And then they got Lorenzo Cain coming back this year. And so I didn't really see the fit there. And, of course, Avisail Garcia is back this year as well. So JBJ offensively doesn't bring a ton. He's kind of struggled at the plate. His fielding metrics have gone down a little bit. I think he's still above average, but not elite. Definitely didn't see him signing in Milwaukee, though. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely I got to kind of agree with Chris. I don't really like this signing. It's one that's definitely puzzled. You kind of have to think what went into that signing for JPJ in terms of going to Milwaukee. He's not really a guy who's been a huge at plate guy. He doesn't really, his hitting has been a little streaky over the couple of years. I think he does give that kind of speed that Milwaukee needs. He's kind of got that spark and that chisp that they need. So I kind of like the signing. I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's a huge splash in the water in terms of Milwaukee and their postseason run, but I think that it's definitely something that can maybe give them another support in the outfield, or maybe give them another guy who can bring in some sort of speed with running on the bases and stuff like that. But overall, it was a decent signing. I think he could have done better, and Milwaukee could have done better. But I think that it's good for now, for early in the year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting because the Brewers, they have a crowded outfield right now, and it's not really a game changer in terms of the NL Central race. I know JBJ brings a lot to that outfield defensively, which is basically what he's best known for, and that's why he was a hot commodity, or at least he was thought to be a hot commodity. But he doesn't really change much in terms of what the Brewers can do competition-wise. I mean, maybe you can replace Lorenzo Cain in center field. Obviously, I think he's a better defensive option right now, especially since Cain, he's getting older and he hasn't played in over a year. So you don't know what you're going to get from him. But in terms of the NL Central, I still think that the Cardinals are my number one team. I'm not sure how that affects your rankings over there.
Yeah, I guess it brings them a little bit closer to the Cardinals. It's funny. I was looking at some of the projected standings, and it's like the NL Central is like 4 teams between like 80, 82 wins, which is really low. For a division winner. I think that Milwaukee probably. They've got Woodruff and Burns at the top 2 in their rotation there, and they do have a good top end of the bullpen as well, with Devin Williams and Josh Hader. So they definitely have a chance. I still think on paper, St. Louis is better. Chicago, if all their stars that are in their contract years kind of come up and, have a big season looking for that big payday at the end of the year, they might even be better on paper. So I still think that they're probably the 3rd best team right now in the NL Central, which isn't saying much. I mean, in most divisions, that's probably fourth or even fifth in some.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the NL Central, it's kind of a toss up. I mean, any team can really win that division, but I think it's definitely what Logan was saying. The Cardinals have it, especially after the offseason acquisition of Nolan Arenado at third base. I think that just gives them a better chance in terms of the NL Central. And I think the Cubs, they're not really, I mean, a couple of years ago, they were in the World Series. They won the World Series. And it was kind of like this team's headed on the right path. They had the young stars as Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo. But I think now the Cubs have definitely dropped off exponentially. And people are not really, it's kind of like they lost in the postseason to the Marlins, who haven't been to the postseason in it was about 17 years. So that's definitely shocked fans. And I think that the Cubs really aren't heading on the right path right now. I think they need to get back to that stardom. They need to get their guys back healthy and really get the bats going, because that team is really struggling. But definitely the Cardinals, I think they're going to be the team to win that division.
Yeah, I'd be confident calling the Brewers probably like the second best team right now in the NL Central. And I think my best comparison for them is the discount version of the Angels, just because they have the bats offensively to get the job done. They have like Christian Yelich, their own little version of Mike Trout, but they don't have the pitching, and they don't really decide to do anything about it. And JBJ, he adds defensive value, but he doesn't really make a team that much better. And I think the Cardinals, they're still the top team to watch right now in that division. The Cubs are kind of heading towards a rebuild right now, traded away Yu Darvish, have looked into trading away guys like Chris Bryant. And then the Reds are kind of in like a middle of the pack boat kind of thing as well. And the Pirates are just considered the fifth best team in that division. But I think the other signing I want to look at before we take a look at spring training, this happened a couple hours ago, actually. The last like decently good remaining pitcher on the market, and that was Jake Odorizzi going to the Houston Astros on a 2-year contract. But the Astros, I don't really think they were in rumored to get a guy like Odorizzi. But Carlos, what does he really add to that Astros rotation?
Yeah, he definitely gives them that extra spark after losing Garrett Cole. And I think that bullpen was really suffering, that starting rotation. They definitely have the bats and the fielding, no doubt. Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve. I mean, the list goes on. They lost a couple guys. But I think definitely Jake Odorizzi, he gives them that extra, that emphasis, that push in that bullpen that they need to make a postseason run again, because this team definitely, I mean, they struggled a little bit last year in the postseason. I mean, we kind of expect them to be one of the top teams in the league, but definitely that bullpen was lacking a little bit in terms of that pitcher position. So I think Odorizzi was a great signing for them, and it gives them that extra emphasis on that offseason push.
Yeah, I definitely think Odorizzi kind of takes some of that stress off of the bullpen. Last year the starting rotation was so banged up that they had to rely a lot on a bullpen, and I believe they set like the record or something for most call-ups in their bullpen. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, their bullpen was almost entirely composed of rookies at one point last year. So definitely getting him back and adding him with Greinke and McCullers definitely helps. I think that they'll be able to rely on their starters a bit more, and it won't just be, one or two starters at the top of the rotation and then the rest are bullpen days. It's still a thin rotation, but he'll add some stability. I mean, he's not a guy. I know last year he was a bit banged up, but up until last year, really, he's been very durable. 150 innings plus most seasons. So he brings durability that Houston really needs after, of course, Verlander going on the injured list, and then Garrett Cole, of course, leaving. So it'll definitely help them, and I think it kind of further cements them as the favorites in the AL West. I mean, with the Athletics losing some guys, I'm not really sure who else is going to challenge them. I mean, maybe if the Athletics could actually pay people, they would. But other than that, I think that they got the division again out there, and this definitely helps them going forward into the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Odorizzi kind of adds that stability to that Astros rotation, kind of like you said. He played pretty well in Minnesota in the past couple of years, so I don't really see him being anything more than a 3 or a 4 kind of starter, especially on a 2-year contract. But when guys go to Houston to be a starting pitcher, and they just get tremendously better. I mean, Charlie Morton, no one really expected him to break out like he did. Garrett Cole went from good to great when he went to Houston in that trade. It just happened a lot recently with these Houston Astros starting players. So I think that Odorizzi could definitely add some stability to an injured Astros rotation. So then looking into what's going on around spring training, we haven't had a show since spring training really kicked off, and there have been some noticeable moments that have taken place during spring training. A lot of noticeable debuts. But Chris, what's something that really popped off to you during these first couple weeks in spring training?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that there is no better tradition I think, in sports than the first being able to overreact to the first couple of spring training games. Like, I mean, it's fun, of course, to watch the stars, take the field for the first time. But I would much rather watch, the 20, 21-year-old prospects trying to make a name for themselves. Like, of course, to be a homer here for the Phillies, Mickey Moniak going yard twice. I mean, and everybody's kind of written him off as a bust. So I love those kind of moments. And really, I think it was Joe Adele might have went yard today for the Angels, but getting to see kind of, I guess, the future. I mean, obviously, they're probably a lot of these guys won't make the opening day lineup. That's by far my favorite part of spring training, I would say.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. It's definitely the fact that we get to see these young guys make a name for themselves. And I think we have tons of teams that have excellent farm systems and young prospects. But definitely for me, what sticks out is the Miami Marlins. I mean, the fact that they got an excellent bullpen, they got Sixto Sanchez coming back and Sandy Alcantara. And I think that really bolsters in terms of their pitching, because this was a team that, they made it to the first round of the playoffs, and then they beat the Cubs, and then they lost to the Braves, but definitely a team that can come back and really bolster their lineup and stuff. And they got a couple names in the offseason. So I think definitely the Miami Marlins are really going to shock fans this year. It might be an overreaction. I mean, we're only in the first month of spring training, but definitely I think the Marlins are a team to look out for.
Yeah, the Marlins are first in the Grapefruit League standings out there, and then in the Cactus League, the Cubs have the same record. Those are the two teams that matched up in the first round of the playoffs last year. But yeah, I love watching like those little position battles. Like for a Mets fan, like Jordan Yamamoto came out, had a really solid outing out of the bullpen. He's a guy who's just trying to make a roster right now, for example, in for the New York Mets. And then just looking at some of these debuts of guys who just recently moved teams. I mean, Trevor Bauer came out, had a really solid outing with the Dodgers the first time he played. Then Francisco Lindor did the same thing for the Mets. I think he got a hit in his first game there. And that was a highly televised thing where SNY normally doesn't broadcast, or I don't think they had the rights to broadcast that game. And then they were allowed to broadcast at the top of the first or something like that, just so they could see Lindor's first at bat. Just seeing some of those things like that. And then some of the games that have taken place where you get into a game, it's going well, and then it ends early for some reason. Like the both managers decide to call it. Like for example, the Phillies were destroying the Yankees. I know we were talking about it in the chat. They won like 15-0 in that game, but they didn't even play the ninth inning at all. Like both managers just agreed to call that game. And there have been instances like that in some of these other games, like the Rays and the Twins. They went to 7 games. They went to 7 innings on Thursday. There are a couple of games that go to 7 innings, some that go to 6, but that's a little weird little rule they have this year.
Yeah, I definitely think as we get later into spring training, managers may, be more willing, I guess, to play the full nine. It is a shame. I mean, because I think for a lot, especially for a lot of these young guys, what happens is the first 4 innings or so, they'll keep the starters in, or at least the few starters that are playing for the day, and then they'll sub in, some of their younger prospects that need to get some playing time. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, even if you're getting killed like 15-0, I always think it's worth playing the full nine. I think as we get though later into spring training and managers look to try and get more into like a real in-season feel, that they'll probably play it out more. Um, yeah, I'm definitely not a huge fan of that though. It is really weird that they implemented that this year.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you, Chris. I think if you're gonna end the game earlier, I would think it would be later on in spring training, just because you have the ability to use all your prospects now, and you got your guys fresh coming off injury or whatever, the rehab in the off season, I think now is the time to play the 9 innings and really see who's going to be able to make it into the actual season. Because but by the time at the end of spring training, you kind of already have your 40-man roster. You already know which guys are going to be starting on opening day, which guys you're going to have in the bullpen. So definitely now would be the time to put your prospects out there, put the young guys or your free agent acquisitions, guys that you don't really know how they're going to mesh into the lineup. I think now is the time to be playing the 9 innings, because later on in the year, or later on in spring training, guys are going to be tired, I guess, or you want to rest them before opening day and before the real games count. So I think if you're going to play the 9 innings, I think it would be now is the time at the start of spring training, as opposed to at the end.
Yeah, I actually think it's probably more for the arms that need to get stretched out later in spring training. Not as much the lineup. I mean, you're right. By the end of spring training, it's pretty much set. So I mean, they'll probably stagger who's in and out. But the arms, I think, those are the guys that you probably want, getting into more of a repetition every 5 days as you get later into spring training. So I think those are the guys who would benefit more of playing a full game, later than earlier.
I just think overall, like the scenario, it's just a tough break for the fans. Like if you remember last year, they couldn't even get into the stadium until the playoffs, where it was like I think it was the ALCS when they were in Texas, and the World Series as well, where that was like the only time they really had fans in the stadium. And now spring training is really a chance for people to see like their baseball teams again, see their favorite teams back in action again. And not only is it really hard now to get into those spring training games just because of how expensive they are, like that's just the reality we live in, but to see those games get shortened down to 6 or 7 innings in those games, like it's just unfortunate, especially to people who only can go to like that one or two games, like just make that little trip. Like I know, like for me, like one of the more entertaining parts of being a fan was going to see those spring training games. Just a really good environment in the nice weather in March. Just a really great thing to see. I know I got to experience it last year, but I know for like those fans, it would just be a tough break to see those games get cut short.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely is frustrating. I mean, obviously, I think they probably warned them before going in. I would think that they would have to have some kind of disclaimer like this. The game might not go the full 9, but definitely frustrating for the fans. But at least this year, the we won't have a lot of these weird rules during the regular season. Like we won't have the runner on second rule and extra innings, which I hated that last year. I don't know. I thought that just watered down the game a lot. But the good news is yeah, I think the regular season this year will be better. So once we get through some of the spring training weirdness this year, it should be good.
Yeah, I think if you're an MLB fan and you're gonna buy a ticket to spring training, I would hope and imagine that what's going on with your sport, that there could be the possibility of a game ending at the 5th or 7th inning. But yeah, it definitely sucks. I mean, you got maybe a first time fan who's going to a spring training game, and it's tough because you really have to make that trip. Like, for example, I'm from Miami, so the Marlins, you have to make that couple-hour drive up to Jupiter, Florida, to see the Marlins play and stuff like that. So it definitely sucks. I mean, you're going to pay the ticket, you're going to do the drive up to see only 5 innings of a game as opposed to a whole 9. So definitely for the fans, it's frustrating even more, but there's kind of some sense to it. You're resting your arms and your bats for the actual season. So definitely tough for the fans.
And overall, we talked a little bit about how the prospects get a lot of playing time in spring training. But heading into the opening day of the season, what are some top prospects? Funnily enough, we're finally talking about our name here. But what are some top prospects you're looking forward to seeing for this opening day, the start of the MLB season?
I've been waiting for this one, so I'm glad you threw this question out here. I've been waiting for this and the farm system rankings here. I definitely think, obviously, Wander Franco is kind of, I mean, he's the number one prospect in all of baseball right now. So I think he's one to watch. I would like to see the Mariners call up Jared Kelenic. I mean, I know that hurts you in your core, Logan, there as a Mets fan. I mean, he seems like from the videos that I've watched, I mean, he is a lot of fun. And I know that there's a lot of service time manipulation that's going to go on. And I'm sure during the next collective bargaining agreement, that'll be a big part of the fight there between the players and, the league. But he's another one that I think probably is ready. I mean, I know he's only 21, but that bat looks ready to me. And I mean, I think that there's a couple other guys that we saw last year that, I don't know that they're still rookie eligible per se, but I think that getting to see a full season of guy like Brian Hayes, Alec Boehm, Dylan Carlson, I think those guys have really good bats, and I think that they're going to be staples in those lineups for a while. And I think Brian Hayes is a guy that Pittsburgh can really build around. And then, on the pitching side of things, definitely Ian Anderson for Atlanta. I know, again, he probably exhausted his rookie eligibility, if I had to guess. Same with Sixto Sanchez. I mean, those two are absolutely electric arms. Sixto, I think, even has the highest. I think he might have the highest ceiling of all pitchers right now that are still ranked. Maybe Mackenzie Gore. But yeah, I mean, if I had to say one player I'm most looking forward to this year, I think it might actually be a full season of Sixto Sanchez. And I know as a Phillies fan, that hurts a lot. But I mean, he is just such a lively arm. I mean, I know there's been a lot of comps like a Pedro Martinez there, which is obviously huge shoes to fill. But Sixto, he's got such a big arm and he's got that swagger on the mound that I absolutely love.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to piggyback off what you were saying. I think the Mariners, what they're doing out there is awesome. I love the farm system that they have. I talked a little bit about this on Monday, but the Mariners right now, they got 6 top 100 prospects, and 3 of those are 21 and under. You talked about a big name like Jared Kelenic, the number 4 prospect. He's an outfielder, but right now, it just reported today that he's sidelined with a left adductor strain. So he's going to be missing a couple days, maybe a couple weeks at most. But I think a guy who's really going to fill his shoes if he's sidelined for a little bit more is going to be Julio Rodriguez, the number 5 prospect for the Mariners too. Another big outfielder guy. This is a guy that he brings a swagger to the plate. He's got that big arm. And I just love what the Mariners are doing overall. They got, like I said, again, 6 top 100 prospects. That's great. They're going to have excellent guys coming in if they need to call them up at any time in the point. But a big name that I'm definitely looking at is Austin Martin. He's a mix between a shortstop and an outfielder for the Blue Jays. This is a guy that he's right now the 22 ranked prospect, and coming out of Vandy, which is a school that just produces tons of MLB talent, and what he's doing alongside with big names like George Springer, and we're looking to see what Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. what they're going to be doing this year. Vlad has definitely slimmed down, and he's got that big bat. So I think the Blue Jays are definitely going to be a team to watch if Austin Martin plays out and he really lives up to his potential.
Yeah, and I think looking at the Mariners, it hurts that one of those top 100 prospects is Jared Kelenic, who obviously enough was with the Mets for a short period of time. But a guy that I'm looking at for a full season in terms of a guy I can't wait to watch, Randy Arozarena. He only played really in the postseason last year, and he had only the most historic postseason of all time, almost willed the Rays to a World Series title. So if he is going to play for a full season, that's a guy I really want to look forward to. And he's a potential rookie of the year kind of guy, as there's no way his rookie eligibility got burned already because he barely played in the regular season. But another guy I want to look at here, a guy who's going to make his debut, Kim Ha-seong from the Padres, came over from Japan, from I think the KBO, I believe he was from. But he's already 25 years old, high contact guy, got a great glove at second base, and he's the guy who's immediately going to fill in that second base role for the Padres and create a really deadly infield with him, Eric Hosmer, Fernando Tatis Jr., and then Manny Machado. So he's going to be a guy who's already pro level right away, played great in the KBO, and he could be a rookie of the year contender in the NL. So that's a guy I'm looking forward to in terms of just high contact guy and high glove, just really great awareness with the glove.
Yeah, definitely. He's kind of one that I think probably flies under the radar just because he's, a little bit older since he's had some professional time in the KBO, whereas a lot of these guys that get all the hype coming up are like 21, 20, 22. So definitely I think he's kind of one that's going to fly under the radar and one to watch this year for San Diego. Another one I do want to hit on is out in Atlanta because that outfield has the potential to be a lot of fun. I mean, obviously Marcell Ozuna coming back. I mean, he's not the greatest fielder in the world, but he does have a great bat out in left field, and of course Acuna out there. But with Nick Markakis, I'm assuming. I mean, he hasn't signed anywhere, and I'm assuming he's not going to re-sign with them. It looks like Christian Pache should get some time out there in center field. And from everything that I've heard, I think the bat might be a bit of a concern, but from what I've heard, I mean, he is kind of a human highlight reel out in center field. I mean, I know Baseball America's scouting report there claims that he's arguably the best defensive center fielder since Andrew Jones. I mean, he's got an 80 grade fielding tool, 70 for run, 70 arm. So I mean, he could be a lot of fun to watch patrol center field there in Atlanta. The bat might not be there right away. I mean, he's still young and hasn't had a ton of AAA time. So I think even if he is starting there, I would expect to see the glove kind of ahead of the bat. But that I think will be the big trio for a long time to come in Atlanta, with Ozuna signing that big contract, and of course Acuna's contract being an absolute steal. So definitely kind of the rich get richer there down in Atlanta. I think the guy behind him, who's another top 100 prospect, Drew Waters, will probably serve as kind of their call up outfielder if one of those three get hurt, that he would step in. But for now, I think he goes to AAA for more seasoning. But Christian Pache is definitely a top 10 prospect in all baseball, and one that will more than likely get the lion's share of the work in center field.
Yeah, I want to quickly touch back on Randy Arozarena. I think that what you guys were saying, that he's right now his rookie year hasn't really burned off that eligibility, so he's in the running for rookie of the year potentially. And I think he's a guy who really only played. I mean, he played the majority of the season was the postseason, and he rode the Rays to the World Series. So I think he's a guy who's definitely going to make an impact this year for the Rays. And I'm eager to see what he's going to bring to the table again in year two, because he's an electric guy and he's really stepping up and playing a leadership role for that team, even being such a young guy. So definitely Arozarena is a top guy that I want to look.
Yeah, I think just looking at where Rosarena kind of left off, he was the go-to guy on that race World Series team that went all the way there, and he's probably looking at you're probably looking at Rosarena as the top offensive option for this Rays team. It's a Rays team that got weaker. You don't really know what to expect offensively, and Rosarena was the only offense when they made it to the World Series there. So it's looking like he's already going to be their top go-to guy. So in terms of AL Rookie of the Year contenders, he has to be number one for sure.
Yeah, well, he's going to need to be for the Rays to be competitive, because if you look at that lineup, it's not all that impressive. I mean, Brandon Lau he really was disappointing, I think, during the postseason. I expect him to bounce back this year, but they don't have that great of a lineup, and that was kind of their undoing in the postseason. They definitely didn't do anything to add to it, and their rotation got worse. So they're going to have to hit more to compensate for that. And I think the Rays are one of those teams, kind of like the Athletics, that because they can't sign all these big name free agents, and a lot of times they can't extend their homegrown guys either because they grow into stardom and then they can't pay them. They rely on a lot of these prospects coming up. So Randy Arozarena, who is the number 4 prospect on Fangraphs, at least I know some have him as already graduated. So, but they're going to rely on him. They're going to rely on Wander Franco. I think. I mean, we'll have to see if he cracks the opening day lineup. I mean, I think he's already better than Willy Adames there in shortstop, and maybe the Rays could flip Willy Adames for some prospects. But between Arozarena, maybe Wander Franco, and then Luis Patino is another one who, with the weakening of that rotation out there in Tampa Bay, they're probably going to have to rely on some of their starting pitching prospects. I think he'll be the first one up. He's still not 100% polished, but he's got a very lively arm, a great fastball. I believe is like a 70 grade. But yeah, they're going to rely on a lot of these young guys, not just a Arozarena, but for them to make the playoffs, they're going to have a Arozarena step up for sure.
So moving on to something that we didn't get to talk about last week because the list wasn't finalized yet, but the MLB released their top 100 players right now, and we'll react to the list later on. But looking at the top 10, what happened when that came out a couple of days ago, or a couple weeks ago, excuse me, I know Chris and I were kind of talking about it, and basically the argument was we can do better. So we came up with our top 10 players right now, and who the way it's kind of organized, that's basically up to us. But I know, Carlos, I'm pretty sure you have yours as well for this. But Chris, I want to start out with you and just go down however you want.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the list right now. So number one, is Mike Trout. I would agree with that generally. I think a lot of times I even overlook him sometimes just because of the fact that he's with the Angels and, he doesn't have the team around him. I mean, imagine if people, if he had other presence in his lineup. I mean, now I know he's Rendon, and, hopefully a healthy Ohtani to protect him in the lineup. But, I think if you put him on any other lineup where he had protection and pitchers had to pitch to him, his numbers would be even better. So for me, he's definitely number one. Mookie Betts at number two, I don't have a problem with. Honestly, my biggest problem here is Fernando Tatis at six. I know it feels like I might be jumping the gun a little bit with him. Clearly the Padres don't think so after that monster contract they handed out. I gotta say, I think he's a top five player in all of baseball, Tatis. And, I would almost rather separate because I know they have DeGrom at number three. Honestly, I'd almost rather separate between position players and pitchers just because it's kind of a hard comparison there to compare a shortstop with a starting pitcher. If I were just going position players, I think Mike Trout at one, Mookie Betts at two, and then I would put Tatis at three and then Soto at four, I think. I know they've got Soto at five. The reason I have Tatis over Soto is really solely because of the positional aspect. I mean, Soto's a left fielder. We all know baseball does not value left fielders as much as shortstops. I mean, the shortstop is the captain of the team defensively, the captain of the infield. And some of the plays that Tatis pulls off are unreal at shortstop. And Soto, while he might honestly have the best overall bat, he's not the best overall player because I don't love him in left field. I think he's fine. He's average, but he's not good enough to where I feel like he's better than Tatis or anybody else in that top five. So that's why I put him at my fifth spot. What do you guys think though for a top five, I guess, and then we'll get to the sixth or 10.
So I'll go next. I like Mike Trout at one. That's what the MLB top 100 had. But my heart's telling me to go Mookie at one just because of the postseason production. Obviously you were saying that Mike Trout, he really hasn't had that supporting cast. And I totally agree with that. I think if you put Mike Trout on any other lineup, any better lineup than the Angels, I think he would have probably a World Series ring by now, maybe a couple. But in terms of what Mookie Betts does in his first season, he moved from Boston to LA and he brings them a ring that the LA's been desperately wanting for a couple of years now. I think just what Mookie did, he took over. That's as plainly as I can put it. He took over when the lights were the brightest. You know, he had a couple stolen bases in the World Series. He had obviously a couple home runs, but I think he just took over. That's why I have him at my number one spot. And then number two, Trout. Obviously, you can make that argument for one. But like I said, I don't like the postseason or the lack of postseason production. Three, I'm gonna stick with DeGrom, and four is Freddie Freeman. Also, it's hard to compare a starting pitcher with a positional player, but I think what DeGrom brings to the table for the Mets, and the Mets are definitely going to be dangerous this year. My only issue is at five, they had Juan Soto, but I'm going to put Tatis in. He's a young guy. He definitely got that huge contract, but I think he brings that swagger back to baseball. I mean, baseball is one of those leagues that Robert Manfred really has a ton of rules, and he's got that magnifying glass on players, not really allowing them to have fun. But I think Tatis, he breaks the unwritten rules of baseball, and that's something that fans want to see. You know, the bat flips, the 3-0 taking a shot at a pitch. I mean, I love it. I love what Tatis brings to the table, and I think that the Padres are heading in the right direction, especially with the offseason acquisitions of Yu Darvish and Blake Snell. But I think definitely Tatis plays a huge role, and I think at number five is where he should be.
I just want to jump in there real quick before Logan goes. I'm glad you bring that up about Tatis and the breaking the unwritten rules of baseball, because I'm so tired of the old heads in baseball that are, you know, like, oh, this isn't the way the game should be played. Like, well, nobody's interested in how the game was played. I mean, people want to see, you know, people go to the ballpark to see Soto, Acuna, Tatis. Nobody goes to the ballpark, you know, to see, you know, like not that Anthony Rendon isn't a great player. He is, but he's boring. I mean, he just is, you know, and I mean, same, you know, like guys want to see, you know, people that are going out there and bat flipping and having fun, you know, and the problem today in baseball is you still got some of these older players, and really I think it is because of Manfred, that don't, you know, express anything. And to me, I mean, obviously that doesn't, you know, the rankings are purely statistical, but I do love what Tatis brings to the table in terms of just getting, you know, younger fans excited, and hopefully, you know, it's a new direction for baseball.
Yeah, I agree in terms of what Tatis is doing for the game. I'll get to where I have him on my rankings later on, but it's not in my 1 through 5. And looking at my 1 through 5, it's pretty much the same as what the original rankings had. There's just a small switch up in the order. In terms of 1 and 2, I like what Carlos said about Mookie Betts. The one reason why I'm going to stick with Mike Trout at 1 is because you can't put the lack of postseason success on him. He's not the one making the management decisions. He's not the one who's pitching the baseball. He's just doing everything he can at center field. He's not a part of the most dysfunctional management core in the MLB and the LA Angels, who's wasting a guy like Mike Trout. So I can't really put the lack of postseason success on a guy like him. So I'm going to go with Mike Trout at number 1 just because of what he's done consistently. And Mookie Betts at number 2. You can't really argue that right after Trout. My one mix-up is going to be at 3 and 4. I know that DeGrom being at 3 and keeping him there is kind of like a Mets fan thing to do, but the Shining MVP award kind of helps out Freddie Freeman's case here, as I want to value that more for this year, just because he's coming off an MVP year. I think he deserves to be kind of treated like one at number 3. And it's tough to really compare the pitcher to the hitter. You guys kind of said that before, but I'm going to go with Freddie Freeman ahead of DeGrom just because he's coming off the NL MVP award, where as for DeGrom, he didn't win the Cy Young, which he came in third actually, but that's more just because he wasn't the best pitcher in the NL with DeGrom and Darvish doing what he did there. So my thinking is Freddie Freeman got the best award he could get, while Jacob DeGrom, he was a finalist for it, but he didn't get that. But I'm going to keep DeGrom at 4 just because he's been consistent over those past couple of years. And then I agree with Juan Soto at number 5. I'm going to stick with him just because I like the consistency. That's something I'm going to value on my list here. Soto has been a better player for a longer period of time. I can't really put Tatis in the top 5 just because he hasn't played a full season yet. He hasn't been a finalist for an MVP award, or he hasn't really been a finalist for a top award, where Juan Soto he's had a couple great seasons now in a row, and he missed a good portion, or at least the start of that the start of the 2020 season because of COVID. And then when he came back strong. So I'm going to go with Juan Soto at number 5, and I can't go Tatis any higher than 5 just because he hasn't played a full season, and even in that one hot start he had in the first month of 2020, he still couldn't push that into a top 3 MVP finish.
Yeah, I still think I see what you're saying there about how, he doesn't have the track record. I think definitely part of my projection on him is more that I think he's got a more well-rounded game than Soto. But I mean, Soto's bat, yeah, there's no questioning how elite that is. At number 6, though, for me, I do have Freddie Freeman. If you just took Freddie Freeman's stats against probably the entire NL East, but definitely the Phillies, he would be number 1 just because he is a Philly killer. No, he's amazing. I mean, he's somebody that I believe his contract is up soon, so the Braves are going to have to work on that, and I'm sure it won't be a problem. Although I don't know how much money that they have. I mean, they have room for his contract, considering the Acuna and Albies contracts are so team friendly. But the Braves owners don't seem that willing to spend. But I'll put him at 6. You know, I struggle with number 7. I think I'm going to go with Acuna. He, to me, and this is where the MLB ranking has him, he's not been as consistent as Soto, and I don't think the overall talent is as good as Tatis. Um, so that's why I'm going to keep him at 7. But I mean, he definitely has, the potential for a 40-40 season this year for the Braves. And I think last year he was a little bit banged up. So I do think he's got an MVP in his future, but I'm going to put him at number 7 for now, just because he's been a little bit more streaky than Soto and Tatis, I think. Then at number 8, this is a tough one. I think I'm going to go with Christian Yelich. He had a down year. I realize that. I think he'll come back. If he's not back to himself the first half of the season, then I'll be alarmed. But I think his track record for me is long enough that I'm willing to overlook a bad shortened season last year and put him in at 8. He's not the greatest fielder though, so again, he's kind of like a Juan Soto type of deal where the bat's got to carry him. And Soto, I mean, even though he's a lot younger, has a more consistent bat, so that's why I rank Soto at 5 and Yelich at 8 there. And then at 9, I would put Bellinger. He's another one that again had a down year this year, so I think he kind of slides down my board from what I would have had it. But I do think he's got enough of a track record. He also has that 2019 NL MVP award there. So I'm willing, again, because the 2020 season was so weird, to overlook a bad 2020 and kind of look at the 3 or 4 years before that as part of the track record. And then what number am I up to here? I believe I'm up to 9. Or no, maybe I think I'm up to 10 here. I'm losing track. At number 10, I'm going to go a little outside the box. I'm not putting pitchers on my list just because I think, that kind of deserves a separate list. But I think I'm going to go with DJ LeMahieu, which is a little bit surprising. And actually, the MLB had them at number 14. But he is just such a consistent player. I mean, and he's getting up there in age now. I want to say he's like 34, but all he does is rake, this guy. And the Yankees are lucky to have him re-signed because he is an on-base machine. he's one of those guys that, like Freddie Freeman, it feels impossible to pitch to because he can cover all of the plate. I mean, there's no way to get around him. There's no holes in his swing. He's also a good fielder there at second base. So I like him a lot. I think that even when he was out in Colorado, he was underrated. He's played great in New York. And if you're the Rockies to see, on the MLB's list at least, Arenado, LeMahieu, and Story ranking 13, 14, and 16. Yeah, you got to start questioning your front office there. I mean, if you have 3 top 16 players and can't get anything done. But yeah, I would put him to round out my top 10, my position player top 10, that is.
Yeah, so I'll start on my 6. On 6, I have Acuna. I mean, there's no doubt what he's been able to do. And like you were saying, he's on track maybe for a 40-40 year. I think maybe he can get up to 50-50 even potentially. We just have to see what he wants to do this year. At 7, I have Soto, just because I'm a guy who likes baseball, who likes the energy that baseball players bring. So obviously the electric guys, Tatis, Mookie Betts, that's why I have them so high, as opposed to more of the analytical guys and stuff like that. But definitely Soto's a young talent. He's a great guy, great ball player. But I think at 7 is where he is. And then rounding out 8, I have Yelich, just because the bad season. I think we can overlook that just because we only played 60 games this year, so he really didn't have that momentum, that his usual fling of what he does in a full year. So I think we can really overlook that, even though he had a pretty bad year. I want to say it was a career high 31% strikeout rate. So definitely he needs to get back in his groove for a full season. And then 9 and 10, I have Rendon and Bellinger. We know what Rendon can do, but he's definitely not one of those guys who is a big he's a boring ball player to watch. That's the thing. I mean, he's great at what he does, but he's a boring ball player. There's no doubt his track record and what he brings to the table, but definitely I like to have those electric guys up there. And then 10, Bellinger, definitely another outfielder who had an off year, as opposed to his 2019 NL MVP year. But definitely he showed that his bat can be potent in the postseason when it's needed, stepping up for the Dodgers in the World Series and whatnot. So I think that rounds out my top.
Yeah, and I'm looking at my 6 through 10 here. I'm going to go Anthony Rendon a little bit higher. I'm going to put him at 6, just because there were guys like Acuna, Bellinger, Yelich. They all had down seasons compared to what they're used to. But Rendon managed to stay consistent. Had, I think, a 280 batting average this past year, despite moving to a new division and a new team. And that was after following I think, third place MVP finish in his last year in DC. So the consistency is there. So I'm going to stay with Rendon at 6. I'll finally go Tatis at number 7, just because he had a solid rookie year where he didn't play. He played less than 100 games, yes, but he had a solid first half of 2020. I think that's enough. He's got great defensive ability as shortstop, provided a good pop to the bat, and he just makes the game different. He makes the game fun. So I can't go Tatis at 5, just because the guys who are in front of him in my mind have done what they've been doing for longer and better. So I'm going to go Tatis at number 7. 8 and 9 are kind of in the same spot. I'm going to go Acuna at 8 and Bellinger at 9. And I think the one thing that kind of separates them is that Acuna, he had a slow start, yes, but he managed to pick it up throughout the second half of the season. And he was back to being an MVP caliber player once again. So I think I'm going to go with Acuna at number 8, just because of what he brings to the defensive side of the game out in center field. He's out in the outfield, excuse me. He's always been a solid option there. I'm going to go Bellinger at 9. And then number 10 was tough for me. I was deciding between Garrett Cole and DJ LeMahieu. Just picking which Yankee I was going to go with. I'm going to go Garrett Cole. It was pretty tough just deciding between those two guys, but Garrett Cole, once again, another guy who kind of changed teams, and he had a really good year with the New York Yankees. He's always been one of the top pitchers in the game. It was kind of up for debate between him and Jacob deGrom, who's the best pitcher in the game. Obviously, I think deGrom's still the best, but Garrett Cole, he had a really solid year, first year in New York. So I'm going to go with him at number 10. And then DJ LeMahieu was a guy that I almost put on there, Chris. I know you did, but LeMay, he's always been a guy who's been consistent, found his way in the top 3 of the MVP race. I think he made it there this year, made it there last year as well. But a guy I didn't put on there that you guys did was Christian Yelich. And I know that Acuna and Bellinger both had down years, and so did Yelich. But the main difference was that Christian Yelich was so bad last year that he was a liability when it came to the playoffs and later in the season. I think Carlos mentioned it before, his strikeout percentage was the highest it's ever been by a long shot. And he just was a liability. And people wanted to face him in the playoffs. Like, he didn't really help his team much at all. Like, he had the power, at least some aspects of the power, but he just couldn't hit a baseball last year. And that's the main reason why I couldn't put him in the top 10, because you can't have a guy like that in your top 10. And he didn't really bring much defensively, played right field, DH, not really a high defensive position like shortstop or center field. So I couldn't really put a guy like that in my top 10.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a big year for him. I think because, he's one of those guys that he's going to have to keep breaking because he doesn't bring all that much in the field. Same with someday Soto when he gets older, into his mid 30s or whatever. He's going to have to be like a Nelson Cruz kind of guy that just keeps raking throughout his career because he's not the greatest corner outfielder in the world, and corner outfield is already probably the least important fielding position in baseball. I do want to actually go back real quick to some of what we were talking about before. Although before I get there, I want to go through my pitchers. I did want to give, because not to upset the Mets fans out there, Logan, but I did want to say my top pitcher on my pitchers board is Jacob deGrom. I always like to keep the position player and pitcher rankings separated, just because it's the same thing with WAR, wins above replacement, how it needs to be adjusted because starting pitchers are running out there once every 5 days, and position players, you're there night in and night out. So I don't think it's that fair of a comparison. So that's why I'm putting deGrom at 1 on my pitchers board. After that, I think there's a drop off. I mean, Garrett Cole didn't have the greatest first year in Yankee Stadium. It's also impossible to pitch in Yankee Stadium. I mean, I could hit a home run to right field there. So, but I would put Garrett Cole probably second, I guess. Scherzer is definitely on the decline. But looking over his track record the last couple of years, I would be pretty stupid to keep him out there. So I would have to put him third. Trying to think who else I'm missing on my. Trevor Bauer. I know I'm missing Trevor Bauer.
I know in my honorable mentions for like justness, I had Shane Bieber listed pretty high on there just because of how dominant he was last year. But I also kept him off my top 10 just because, like, the Central teams, we saw how bad they were in the playoffs, but you can't deny how dominant he was in the regular season.
Yeah, I do like Shane Bieber a lot. In fact, he probably cracks my top 5 pitchers. I still don't. I don't know. I guess I got to put Trevor Bauer in there at 4. I'm still. Again, he doesn't have the consistency that I would like to see. I mean, I know he had a phenomenal year, and he's had 2 phenomenal years, but then he's also had, the majority of his other years where his ERA is around 4. So that's why if you're going to make that argument for Yelich, I make that argument for Bauer that he's not a top 3 pitcher in baseball right now. But I think it's definitely deGrom, and then probably Cole, then Bieber is what I would put for my top 3. Then Bauer at 4. Number 5, I could take a lot of different arguments, quite honestly. I did say Max Scherzer was in there. I think it was deGrom. Now I'm missing who. I forgot who I put second here. It was deGrom, and then it's
deGrom, Cole, and Bieber.
Okay, it was deGrom, Cole, and I think I'll put Scherzer, Bieber, and then Bauer at 5. That's who, if I'm taking a top 5 for pitchers.
All right, the last thing I think we really have to cover here on this episode of Top Prospects. We can take a look around that top 100 list that came out a couple weeks ago. Just kind of do our initial reactions to it. I know it's kind of all over the place in terms of some of the rankings there, but Carlos, I want to start out with you. What was something that really stood out with those rankings?
Well, definitely for me, what stood out, a guy that stood out was at 27, they had Tim Anderson, shortstop from the White Sox. I mean, we saw what he did this year, but he had a huge leap from the previous year. They had him at 95 in 2020, and then he jumps to 27. So huge year from Tim Anderson, but definitely another guy that kind of shocked me for the wrong reasons, I guess, would have to be definitely at 38, Clayton Kershaw. Just the fact that he's one of those guys who's got the huge curveball, and he's probably one of the top pitchers in the league always. He's always in that conversation, or as a big name as a pitcher. But definitely, we're starting to see a little bit of a decline with Kershaw. We've seen his postseason struggles in his career over the last couple of years, but definitely he seems to be on the right track in terms of picking it up in the postseason. But I don't like where it's going with Kershaw. I see him steadily declining and dipping in terms of rankings, and it's going to be a big shocker for Dodgers fans if they see this continuing. So I think Kershaw really needs to step it up. He's getting older, of course, but definitely he needs to return to his old self to help them maybe go back to back.
Yeah, I mean, the Dodgers do just churn out pitching though like crazy. So I think obviously having Kershaw, 100% and back to where he was would help. But it also sounds like, and I think this was from an interview after they won the World Series. I don't know how much longer he wants to play, quite honestly, because I think it was him that was saying, like it's just harder to get motivated after winning a World Series ring at his age, and after all of his other accomplishments. So I don't know how much else he has to prove. I think he's kind of at this point ready to ride off into the sunset. He's had his share of injuries. So I don't see him as a staple in that rotation for that much longer. So, and actually, I believe his contract is coming up pretty soon. So it will be nearing a decision. Yeah, this is his last year on that contract at 31 million. So we'll know after this year how much longer he really plans to play. I don't think it's that many more seasons, but that also did surprise me on the list. The other thing that surprised me, though, I do think it's kind of warranted, is Steven Strasburg slipping from 60 or slipping from 20 to 60. I think that contract, and obviously they had to give him the money that they gave him. If you had to choose, if you could go back in time between paying Rendon and Strasburg, I pay Rendon 9 times out of 10, just because of the value of an everyday player. Rendon doesn't have the history of a major injury like Strasburg has, and Strasburg has a lot of injury history. I mean, we saw that this year. Really, they were lucky that they got that postseason run out of him, because he, throughout his career, has not been very durable. And now that he's on the wrong side of 30, I don't see, he's 32, he'll be 33 this July. I don't see those injury, problems going away anytime soon. I don't know how they would with age. So I think that contract is kind of going to be an issue down the road for the Nationals. So it's not too big of a surprise, but it is a surprise that it was 40 spots. The other thing there was actually just above Strasburg on the list, falling from, going up from 99 to 57 was Bo Bichette. I actually like that a lot. In fact, I could make the case that he should be even higher. He's a lot of fun to watch, and I think he doesn't get talked about as much as, like a Soto, Acuna, Tatis, because he hasn't quite put up, the gaudy numbers that they have, but he's also a lot of fun to watch. He kind of brings that youth energy on a Blue Jays team that, in my mind, if I'm going to the casino, putting money on it right now, I think that they have a better team than the Rays, but he's a lot of fun to watch, that Bo Bichette. And really all of the, I guess the three MLB bloodline players they have with him and Vladdy and who's the other one I'm thinking of there who always gets overlooked?
Austin Martin.
Not Austin Martin. Oh God, this is gonna haunt me now. The second baseman there for the Blue Jays. That's who I'm thinking of. Calvin Biggio, yeah. So, they do have a really good core there, but Bo Bichette, to me, even more than Vlad, is kind of like the nucleus of that core.
Yeah, I think two guys on that list that I had, they kind of conflict each other in a way. And I'll get to my reason why, but Jose Abreu at number 31 on the list, I think he was just a little too low just after winning the AL MVP, which was a pretty stacked race. Jose Ramirez, talked about DJ LeMahieu, they're all involved in that race, but it was Abreu who ended up winning that with a really solid 2020. And the fact that he's only at 31, I think, isn't really warranted. I think that you could make an argument for him being inside the top 20, especially with Freddie Freeman, who had a very similar season to him in 2020 and won an MVP as well. He's at number 4 on the list. So I think that you can make an argument for Jose Abreu to be in the top 20, but it kind of showed me that, or at least I thought, that 2020 didn't really matter into their list. But then you see Randy Arozarena sitting at number 100, and maybe you think that 2020 kind of means something to be on that list because Arozarena only played in the postseason, hasn't really played a lot of regular season games yet in his career, and yet he's considered a top 100 player in all of baseball. So it's kind of conflicting to me as we don't really know what the list is really based on. But the fact that a guy has only played in the postseason in his career and he's making the top 100 list, I think it's kind of a little confusing.
Yeah, I also want to quickly highlight the 60s here actually has a lot of guys that have dropped. Javi Baez dropped from 23 to 61. Chris Bryant from 34 to 62. Eugenio Suarez from 35 to 63. The list keeps going. Gleyber Torres, 31 to 64. So it definitely seems like they did factor in 2020 in a lot of these because all of those guys had very down 2020s. Like Javi Baez to me was one of the best shortstops in the game. And then 2020 kind of did give me a little bit of pause for that. But definitely some guys that dropped on there. I would have to say, though, that there was a few that I don't know that are warranted. Like Jack Flaherty from 28 to 68 feels a little steep. I love his stuff. Jack Flaherty. I think he's going to have a great bounce back year out in St. Louis. But I agree that it feels like it wasn't clear how heavily 2020 was weighed because for some of these guys, it dragged them down a lot because a lot of guys did have down 2020s. And then, for some of these guys, the short sample size really kind of boosted them.
And with that, that is going to wrap up episode 4 of Top Prospects. Thank you, Carlos, for hopping on this one with us. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys. It was a blast.
And with that, that is going to wrap up episode 4 of Top Prospects. Be sure to tune in throughout the entire baseball season to catch more of myself and Chris, possibly more guests on the way. But this was a fun one to record, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.